They say the devil hides in the details. I didn't understand that until I started noticing them in my own life. The subtle shifts, the unexplained changes, the things that didn't sit right no matter how much I tried to ignore them. I'm James Miller, and I used to believe that the life I built was unshakable. Solid wife, 2 great kids, a good job. On paper, I had it all. But the truth doesn't live on paper, and when it comes out, it can gut you like a fish. It wasn't one single moment that shattered everything. No, it was a series of tiny fractures, a smile that lasted too long, a late night that wasn't explained, a photo that didn't look right. Looking back, I wonder if I should have caught it sooner. But when you're the guy who works 60-hour weeks to give your family a better life, you don't have the luxury of suspicion. At least, that's what I told myself. Rachel and I had been married for 17 years. We met in high school, back when life was simple and promises felt unbreakable. I was the quiet, steady type even then, always dependable, always working toward the next goal. Rachel was different. She was outgoing, full of ideas, the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. Together, we balanced each other. At least that's how it seemed. We had 2 kids, Tyler, 16, and Emily, 14. They were our pride and joy, and I built my life around giving them the kind of stability I didn't have growing up. We weren't the kind of family to do grand vacations or big shows of affection, but we had traditions, Sunday dinners, movie nights, the little things that make a house a home. For years, I thought we were untouchable. And then, slowly, that started to change. It began with Rachel working late. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's a journalist and deadlines don't keep 9 to 5 hours. But her late nights became more frequent, and her reasons less convincing. We had a last-minute meeting, she'd say. Or, I'm working on a big feature. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then there were the other things. She started dressing differently, sleek blouses, pencil skirts, high heels. It wasn't her usual style, but when I asked about it, she laughed it off. Just trying to look more professional, she said. It's for work. Then there was her phone. Rachel used to leave it lying around the house, but now it was always with her, clutched tightly or tucked away in her bag, with the screen locked. I caught her smiling at a text once, a private little grin that set my teeth on edge. Still, I tried to let it go. I was too busy with work and life to start a fight over nothing. And then came the photo. It was Tyler who sent it to me. He'd gone fishing with Rachel and Andrew Walker, a family friend who'd been in our lives for as long as I could remember. Andrew was the kind of guy who always showed up, barbecues, holidays, you name it. I liked him well enough, though we were never close. The photo showed Rachel and Andrew standing by the lake, their faces lit by the sun. Rachel's hand rested on Andrew's shoulder, her smile soft and intimate. Something about it made my stomach churn. Then Tyler said, almost laughing, "Don't you think Uncle Andrew kind of looks like me?" The words hit me like a sucker punch. I felt the heat rise in my chest, anger bubbling beneath the surface. I didn't say anything to Tyler. I wasn't about to blow up in front of my son, but my mind was racing. That night, I waited until Rachel was asleep. I sat in the living room, staring at that photo on my phone, replaying everything in my mind. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she always kept her phone close. And now this. I wasn't going to be a fool. If something was going on, I'd find out. And when I did, there'd be hell to pay. The morning after Tyler sent me that photo, I sat in the kitchen, staring into my coffee, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Rachel waltzed in, humming as she tied her hair back, completely oblivious to the war raging inside me. She kissed me on the cheek and chatted about her day, the same way she always did, but her voice grated on my nerves now. I couldn't stop picturing her hand on Andrew's shoulder or the way she smiled at him in that photo. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the photo. Everything had been wrong for months. The late nights, the phone she never let go of, the way she dressed. I'd ignored it all, told myself I was imagining things. But that was over. I wasn't going to sit back and let this fester. When Rachel left for work, dressed in one of her new outfits, a fitted skirt and blouse that seemed more suited to a cocktail party than a newsroom, I watched her car disappear down the street before I moved. I started in the bedroom, pulling open drawers and checking behind clothes. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I'd find something. Her jewelry box caught my eye. Rachel always kept her wedding ring in the same spot when she wasn't wearing it, nestled in the little velvet slot. But today it wasn't there. Instead, it was shoved to the back of the drawer, hidden like it didn't mean anything anymore. That was strike one. The next step was her phone. Rachel never left it lying around anymore, but I knew where she kept her backup phone, an older model she'd saved just in case. I grabbed it from the nightstand drawer and tried the passcode. I'd seen her type it once when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It worked. My heart raced as the screen unlocked, but there was nothing. No messages, no emails, no call history. The phone was wiped clean. Smart. Too smart. By that afternoon, I'd bought a set of hidden cameras and voice-activated recorders. If Rachel thought she could outsmart me, she didn't know who she was dealing with. I installed the cameras in the kitchen, living room, and bedroom, and slipped a recorder into her car when she stopped at the store. I wasn't being paranoid. I was taking control. It didn't take long for the first clue to show up. 2 days later, I reviewed footage from the kitchen camera. Rachel stood by the counter, slipping off her wedding ring and dropping it into her purse. She glanced at the clock, then smiled. A few minutes later, Andrew walked in through the back door. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just strolled in like he owned the place. I watched as they talked, laughing too easily, standing too close. Andrew reached out and brushed her arm, and she didn't pull away. Strike two. The real blow came a week later. I'd installed a recorder under the bed, set to activate whenever it detected sound. Most nights, there was nothing. But one Friday when I was working late, it picked up voices. Rachel and Andrew. At first, it was muffled, a joke, a laugh. Then, clear as day, I heard Rachel say, "Daddy's here." My hands shook as I ripped the headphones off. My vision blurred with rage. I wanted to smash something, scream, confront her right then and there. But I held back. Acting in anger was a mistake I wouldn't make. Rachel thought she had me fooled, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I spent the rest of the night writing everything down in a notebook, dates, times, footage. Every detail I needed to build my case. This wasn't just about catching her. This was about taking back control of my life. When the time came, I'd make sure there was no room for her lies, no excuses, and no way for her to escape what was coming. The notebook was filling up fast. Every night, after Rachel had gone to bed, or when she claimed to be out working late, I pored over the footage, the audio recordings, and every scrap of evidence I could find. At first, it was little things, too many laughs, too many shared glances. But then I found what I was really looking for, proof. It started with a video from the bedroom camera. The footage showed Andrew entering the house through the back door, again without knocking. Rachel met him at the kitchen table, where she poured them both glasses of wine. They sat close, too close, talking in hushed voices. I fast-forwarded through their conversation, growing more irritated with every second that passed. Then, after about 20 minutes, Andrew leaned in and kissed her. I paused the video, staring at the screen. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. There was everything I'd suspected, right there in front of me. But I wasn't finished. I skipped ahead, scanning through the footage with shaking hands, until I saw them move to the bedroom. My bedroom. I hit play. I won't go into detail, but what I saw left no doubt. They weren't just fooling around. This wasn't some harmless flirtation or moment of weakness. Rachel and Andrew were having an affair, plain and simple. My fists clenched as I watched them together, anger boiling over into something darker. She'd brought him into my house, my bed, while I was out working to provide for our family. I wanted to smash the screen, to tear the whole house apart. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for rage. The next piece of evidence came from the recorder in her car. Rachel had driven to one of her so-called work meetings, but the recording told a different story. I heard Andrew's voice as clear as day, joking about how Rachel was getting sloppy with her lies. "James isn't that stupid," he said, laughing. Her reply cut deeper than anything else. "You don't know him like I do. He'll believe whatever I tell him." I rewound the recording and played it again, letting the words sink in. She thought I was stupid. She thought I was weak. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her. The final blow came a few nights later, in the form of an audio recording from the kitchen. It started innocently enough, Rachel and Andrew talking over coffee. Then the conversation took a turn. "You need to tell him," Andrew said. "I can't," Rachel replied. "Not yet. Not until the timing is right." "And what about the kids?" There was a long pause. I leaned closer to the speaker, straining to hear her answer. "They'll understand eventually," she said. "Tyler and Emily deserve to know the truth about their real father." My heart stopped. I rewound the recording, listening to it again. And again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But there it was. Proof that Andrew wasn't just her lover. He was the father of my children. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my office, going over every piece of evidence I'd collected. The recordings, the videos, the lies. By the time the sun came up, I had a clear picture of everything she'd been hiding. Their affair wasn't some spur-of-the-moment fling. It had been going on for years, long enough for Andrew to father both of my children. Rachel had built our entire marriage on a lie, but she wasn't going to get away with it. I called a lawyer that morning, laying everything out on the table. The videos, the audio recordings, even DNA tests, which confirmed the awful truth. Tyler and Emily weren't mine. My lawyer looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration. "You've got an ironclad case," he said. "She won't stand a chance." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Rachel walked into the house that evening, her usual facade firmly in place. She gave me a smile as she set her bag down, but I wasn't in the mood to play along. Every detail of her movement irritated me. The way she brushed her hair back, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't for me. I watched her like a hawk as she moved to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water as though everything was normal. "Dinner's in 20 minutes, I said flatly. My voice was calm, but the weight behind it must have caught her attention. She hesitated, her glass halfway to her lips, before she nodded. "Thanks," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words would have come out too sharp, too raw. Instead, I turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce I'd been making for the pasta. I needed her to sit down across from me, to look me in the eye when I laid it all out. There was no running from this. When the table was set, I called her over. She sat, her face a picture of practiced ease, but I could see the faint edge of nerves creeping into her expression. Something in her gut was telling her this wasn't just another family dinner. She wasn't wrong. I let the silence stretch as I poured us both a glass of wine. She sipped hers, watching me, waiting for the cue to start a casual conversation. Finally, she spoke. "You're quiet tonight. Is everything okay?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "That depends, Rachel. Is there something you want to tell me?" Her face faltered for just a second, but she quickly masked it with confusion. "What do you mean?" I slid the notebook across the table, my finger tapping on the cover. "This is what I mean." Rachel opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. Dates, times, transcripts of conversations. Her breathing quickened as she flipped through, her hand trembling slightly. Then she stopped, her face draining of color. She'd found the still image I'd printed from the bedroom footage. "What the hell is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You tell me," I said, my voice cold. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and Andrew have been screwing around behind my back for years." She shot up from her chair, the notebook tumbling to the floor. "This is insane. You're spying on me? Recording me? Do you even hear how crazy that sounds?" I stood, meeting her glare head-on. "Crazy? Let me show you what crazy looks like." I walked to the cabinet where I'd hidden the hard drive, pulling it out and plugging it into my laptop. With a few clicks, the screen came to life, showing the footage I'd burned into my memory. Rachel and Andrew, laughing, kissing, tearing apart everything I thought I knew. Her eyes widened as the video played, her hands clenching into fists. "Turn it off," she hissed. "Why?" "Too hard to watch." Imagine how I felt seeing it for the first time. Her defenses crumbled. She sank back in her chair, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "James, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I snapped. "You lied to me, Rachel. For years. You brought him into my house, into my bed, and now I find out Tyler and Emily aren't even mine." She looked up, her eyes wide with shock. "You did a DNA test?" "Of course I did. And don't even try to deny it. The evidence is all there. Every word you said to him, every lie you told me, every time you called him daddy. She burst into tears, her sobs shaking her body, but I felt nothing but anger. I never wanted to hurt you, she choked out. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Don't you dare play the victim, I said, my voice cutting through her crying. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. What about the kids? She asked, desperation seeping into her tone. They need both of us. You can't just tear this family apart. I scoffed. You tore this family apart the moment you brought Andrew into it. As for Tyler and Emily, I'll make sure they're taken care of. But as far as I'm concerned, you're no longer part of this family. Her sobs turned to pleading, her hands clutching at the table. Please, James, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work through it together. I shook my head. You don't fix something that's broken. You burn it down and start over. The finality in my voice silenced her. She knew I meant it. I told her to pack her things and leave. I didn't care where she went as long as it wasn't here. As she stood, tears streaming down her face, I felt a cold satisfaction. She destroyed everything we'd built, but now the destruction was hers to live with. Goodbye, Rachel, I said as she walked out the door. And don't bother coming back. After Rachel left, the house felt suffocatingly silent. Her absence wasn't a relief. It was a reminder of what had been destroyed. I stood by the kitchen table, staring at the wine glasses we hadn't touched and the notebook still lying open. The weight of everything crashed down on me, but I didn't let it show, not even to myself. This wasn't the time to break. If Rachel thought her tears were the end of this, she was sorely mistaken. I'd spent the past weeks gathering evidence, building my case, and now it was time to act. The first step was making sure Rachel and Andrew didn't have a leg to stand on. This wasn't just about my pride or even justice. It was about reclaiming everything they had tried to take from me. The following morning, I called my lawyer. I laid everything out, the videos, the audio recordings, the DNA results. She listened quietly, her pen scratching across a legal pad, before she leaned back in her chair and said the words I needed to hear. You're in a strong position, James. With this evidence, we can push for full custody, minimal financial obligations, and potentially even restitution. This isn't just infidelity. It's deception on a level that the courts won't take lightly. Good. That's exactly what I wanted. The next step was ensuring my financial security. Rachel wasn't just going to walk away from this and take half of what I'd spent my life building. I combed through every account, every investment, and every bill. It didn't take long to find the discrepancies. Rachel had been siphoning money from our joint account for years, slipping it into a private account I hadn't even known existed. When I saw the transactions, luxury hotel stays, expensive dinners, jewelry, it was like a fresh wound. She'd been using my hard-earned money to fund her little fantasy with Andrew. I documented everything and passed it to my lawyer. She smirked as she scanned the statements. This will go a long way in court, she said. Judges don't look kindly on this kind of financial betrayal. With the legal groundwork laid, I turned my attention to Andrew. He'd been playing house with my wife, walking into my home like he belonged there. It was time to remind him who he was dealing with. I started by digging into his public life. Andrew wasn't just some guy. He was a well-known figure in the community, active in local politics, a rising star with ambitions for a bigger stage. He loved to portray himself as a family man, a pillar of morality. The irony made my blood boil. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into his life, and what came back was a goldmine. Andrew had skeletons in his closet, financial improprieties, shady dealings with campaign funds, and more than one affair. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. I packaged the evidence carefully, sending it anonymously to a few key players, his employer, his political rivals, and a local journalist known for breaking big stories. I didn't need to attach my name to it. The truth would do the damage for me. Andrew's fall from grace was spectacular. Within a week, rumors were swirling. Within 2, he was forced to resign from his position amidst accusations of corruption and misconduct. Watching the news coverage felt like justice in real time. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about stripping away the facade he'd hidden behind for so long. Meanwhile, Rachel was scrambling. She had moved into a motel, and from what I could tell, her parents were footing the bill. She called me once, begging to meet, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't owe her a single second more of my time. What mattered now was the kids. Tyler and Emily were staying with me full-time, their routines uninterrupted. I hadn't told them the full truth yet. It wasn't the right moment, but I made it clear that their lives wouldn't be disrupted any more than necessary. For now, they were my priority, and I'd make sure they had the stability Rachel and Andrew had tried to shatter. Andrew's downfall was just the beginning. Watching his carefully curated reputation unravel gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. The man who had strutted into my home, my life, and my marriage with such smug arrogance was now nothing more than a disgraced shadow of himself. But that wasn't enough. Rachel had betrayed me just as deeply, and she wasn't going to escape unscathed either. After our confrontation, Rachel had gone to ground, retreating to a motel across town. The kids were with me full-time, though they still didn't know the full truth. I wasn't about to dump everything on them at once. But when the time was right, they'd understand exactly who their mother was and why she no longer deserved a place in our lives. I started by making sure Rachel's secrets weren't just mine to carry. The footage I'd collected wasn't something I intended to broadcast to the world, but it needed to be seen by the people closest to us. Friends, family, and a few well-connected neighbors. People who would understand the gravity of her betrayal. Each clip was carefully sent, paired with an unsigned note. This is the truth. This is what she hid from us all. The fallout was swift and brutal. Rachel's social circle, once so tight-knit, crumbled around her. Her closest friends cut ties, appalled by what they'd seen. At first, there were calls, angry, confused, pleading, but I didn't answer. I didn't owe anyone an explanation beyond the evidence they'd already seen. Let them draw their own conclusions. But that was just the beginning. While Rachel's reputation was collapsing, I turned my attention to the financial betrayal she'd tried to keep hidden. The joint account she had siphoned from for years was a mess of unexplained transactions, luxury hotel stays, expensive dinners, and lavish gifts that were clearly meant for Andrew. The most damning discovery, however, was the down payment on a rental property she'd purchased in secret. My lawyer was more than ready to use this ammunition. She filed a comprehensive case that painted Rachel as not only unfaithful, but financially deceptive. Rachel tried to play the victim during the proceedings, crying about how hard her life had been, but the evidence spoke louder than her tears. The judge saw right through her act. The ruling left no room for interpretation. I was granted full custody of Tyler and Emily, while Rachel's visitation rights were heavily restricted. She walked away with only a fraction of the assets, barely enough to cover her mounting debts. It was a far cry from the comfortable life she had tried to build on my back. But the most devastating blow wasn't financial or legal. It came when the kids learned the truth about their paternity. I had wrestled with how to tell them, knowing it would shatter the image of their family they'd held on to for so long. But they deserved honesty, no matter how painful. When I sat them down, I kept my tone steady, even as my stomach churned. There's something you both need to know. It's about your mother, and it's about Andrew. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Tyler was the first to respond, his voice sharp with disbelief. What do you mean? I laid it out as gently as I could, but there was no softening the truth. Andrew isn't just someone who betrayed me. He's your biological father. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Tyler exploded. You're joking, right? This can't be real. It's real, I said, my voice firm. Your mother and Andrew lied to us all. They built this on deceit, and I won't let them get away with it. Tyler stormed out of the room, his fists clenched, while Emily sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. I moved to comfort her, but she shook her head. I don't want to see her again, she whispered. How could she do this to us? Their reactions were a gut punch, even though I'd expected them. Watching their pain was almost unbearable, but I knew the truth was necessary. Rachel had brought this on herself, and now she had to live with the consequences. When she called the next day, begging to see the kids, I let it go to voicemail. She'd lost the right to demand anything from us. Her desperation only grew as word of her affair and financial misdeeds spread. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her parents, once her staunchest supporters, were openly ashamed of her. She was alone, just as she deserved to be. Meanwhile, Andrew was unraveling in his own way. The evidence I'd sent out about his financial improprieties had gained traction, sparking an investigation that left him no choice but to resign. His career, his reputation, his carefully polished image as a family man, it was all in tatters. The man who had once been so confident, so untouchable, fled the state to escape the fallout. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what Rachel and Andrew had tried to destroy. Tyler and Emily were safe with me, and for the first time in years, I could focus on rebuilding without the shadow of their lies hanging over me. Rachel and Andrew could live with the wreckage they created. I was done carrying it for them. Even after the court's decisions and the public exposure of Rachel and Andrew's betrayals, I couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. The pieces didn't all fit. Andrew's sudden departure from town had been abrupt, but not abrupt enough to satisfy me. A man like him, one who thrived on control, wouldn't just walk away without a fight. That nagging feeling led me to dig further. One evening, I sat down in my office and combed through everything I had, a meticulous pile of evidence, notes, and timelines. There had to be more. Andrew had been too cocky, too bold for this to be the whole story. And Rachel, her recklessness couldn't have started with him. My instincts were right. Buried in a file I hadn't reviewed since the divorce proceedings, I found the first thread of a much larger web. It was a series of transaction receipts tied to Rachel's secret account, but this wasn't about the dinners or jewelry I'd already uncovered. These payments led to another man, someone I didn't recognize at first. Curious, I searched his name online. What I found made my blood run cold. The man was a lawyer, a corporate fixer known for discreetly handling scandals. And he wasn't cheap. Rachel had been paying him for years, long before Andrew ever came into the picture. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a full-scale operation to hide whatever mess she'd been making long before I ever caught on. The next day, I confronted my lawyer with the discovery. "I need to know everything this guy was covering up," I said, sliding the receipts across her desk. "Rachel wasn't just cheating on me. She was running a game, and I need to know how deep it goes." My lawyer raised an eyebrow. "This will take some digging, but if he was hired to clean up her messes, it means there's definitely more to uncover." She was right. What came back was staggering. Rachel had been funneling money into private accounts for over a decade, using it to pay off people I never knew existed. There were quiet settlements with former colleagues, unexplained payments to what looked like blackmailers, and even funding for what appeared to be failed business ventures. And then came the twist that tied it all together. Andrew had been one of those blackmailers. Years ago, before their affair began, Rachel had paid him off to keep quiet about something I still didn't fully understand. The pieces clicked into place like a slap to the face. Andrew wasn't just a lover. He'd been a threat, someone who knew too much about Rachel's past. And when the payments stopped, he didn't walk away. Instead, he embedded himself in her life, twisting her lies into leverage until they became lovers, accomplices, and eventually partners in crime. I couldn't stop the wave of disgust that hit me. Rachel had built her life on lies, and Andrew had been the parasite feeding off her deceit. But their web of manipulation was unraveling, and I wasn't about to let it stop. The fallout from Andrew's legal troubles was already massive. The charges against him, fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, were piling up, and the investigations had started to turn toward his associates. Rachel, whether she liked it or not, was being dragged down with him. The media frenzy surrounding Andrew's trial began to touch Rachel's name. It started with whispers, mentions of her involvement in Andrew's dealings, but it quickly grew into full-blown accusations. One local journalist, known for digging into high-profile scandals, reached out to me, asking if I had anything to share. "I might," I said, keeping my tone measured. "What's it worth to you?" They promised discretion, but I made sure my name stayed out of it. I handed over key pieces of evidence that tied Rachel to Andrew's shady dealings, enough to make it impossible for her to plead ignorance. The fallout was brutal. Rachel was called to testify as part of Andrew's case, her name dragged through the mud in the process. She tried to play the victim, painting herself as someone manipulated by a conniving man. But the evidence told a different story. She wasn't just complicit, she was a co-conspirator. When she returned to town after the hearings, she was a pariah. Her friends had abandoned her. Her parents refused to take her calls, and even her attempts to rebuild her professional life were met with slammed doors. She was radioactive, and everyone knew it. For Andrew, things were worse. The charges against him grew more serious by the day. Reports surfaced about offshore accounts, fake charities, and even threats against former business partners. His name was synonymous with scandal, and his once bright future was obliterated. But even with all that, I still couldn't walk away. There was one last thing I needed to do. I sat Tyler and Emily down one evening, the weight of what I had to say heavy on my shoulders. "There's something I need to tell you," I began. Tyler, always the more direct of the two, frowned. "Is this about Mom?" I nodded. "And Andrew, there's something you don't know, something I didn't think you were ready to hear before. But now, I think it's time." I told them everything. The affair, the DNA tests, the blackmail, the lies. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I made sure to emphasize one thing. None of it was their fault. They sat in silence, processing the bombshell I'd just dropped. Finally, Tyler spoke. "So he's our real dad?" "Biologically, yes," I said. "But being a father isn't just about biology. It's about being there, about showing up. And that's what I've done for you, every day of your lives. That's what I'll keep doing." Emily, quiet but clearly shaken, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You're our dad," she said firmly. "Not him." Her words hit me like a lifeline. No matter how much Rachel and Andrew had tried to destroy, they hadn't succeeded in taking everything. But even as I reassured my kids, I knew the battle wasn't over. Andrew and Rachel's games had left scars, and their ripple effects weren't done spreading. There was still one piece left to put in place, one final move to make sure the past stayed buried and the future remained ours. Life didn't snap back into place after everything fell apart. It took time, effort, and more patience than I thought I had. But slowly, the pieces started to come together. Tyler and Emily adjusted to the new normal, finding strength in our little unit. I rebuilt our routines, creating a sense of stability that Rachel's chaos had tried to shatter. Andrew's trial became a drawn-out spectacle, dragging every detail of his shady dealings into the light. Every week, the headlines painted a darker picture of the man who had wormed his way into our lives. Offshore accounts, fake charities, and threats against business partners, it was all there. His sentence, when it finally came, was harsher than anyone expected: 20 years without parole. Rachel's involvement left her in a legal limbo. While she avoided jail, her reputation was in tatters, and her attempts to rebuild her life were met with closed doors. The world she once thrived in had turned its back on her, leaving her isolated and struggling. For me, the hardest part wasn't seeing their downfall. It was making peace with the wreckage they'd left behind. I threw myself into being the father Tyler and Emily needed, focusing on their future instead of the past. Tyler poured his energy into football, his determination driving him to new heights. Emily found solace in art, her paintings reflecting emotions she didn't yet have the words to express. One day, as I watched Emily work on a piece in the backyard, she paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, "do you think Mom will ever get better?" Her question caught me off guard. I wanted to say no, to let my bitterness spill out, but I didn't. "I don't know, Emily," I said carefully. "People can change, but it's up to them to want to. That's not something we can control." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad we have you," she said simply, turning back to her canvas. Those words stayed with me. They were a reminder that no matter what Rachel and Andrew had done, I still had something worth fighting for. But just when I thought I could finally move forward without looking back, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a single page with Andrew's signature scrawled at the bottom. The letter was dated just before his sentencing, and the contents were nothing short of a bombshell. "James, I've lost everything, and I have nothing left to gain by lying. There's one last truth you deserve to know. Rachel wasn't the one who approached me all those years ago. I approached her. I've been in love with her since college, and when I found out she was married to you, I couldn't let it go. I manipulated her, blackmailed her, and forced my way into your lives. The kids, they were part of my plan. I wanted to take everything from you. Your family, your life, your identity. I regret it now. Not because I lost, but because I see the damage I've done. You were the better man, James, and I never stood a chance against that. Andrew. I sat there, staring at the letter, my mind racing. It was a confession, but it wasn't closure. Andrew had spent years tearing my life apart, and now, with nothing left to lose, he was trying to rewrite the narrative. I debated what to do with the letter. Burn it, shred it, or lock it away where no one could find it. But then I thought of Tyler and Emily. They deserved to know the full truth, to understand the kind of man Andrew really was. When I showed them the letter, their reactions were mixed. Tyler was furious, pacing the room as he vented his anger. Emily, on the other hand, simply shook her head. He doesn't deserve any more of our time, she said quietly. She was right. Andrew's confession wasn't a resolution. It was an ending, and it wasn't ours to carry anymore. From that moment on, I made a choice. No more looking back. The past was done, and the future was mine to shape. As the months passed, I reconnected with an old friend, Anna. What started as casual conversations turned into something deeper, a connection I hadn't felt in years. She was warm, genuine, and honest, everything Rachel wasn't. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, Anna turned to me and said, "You've been through so much, James. How do you keep moving forward?" I thought for a moment before replying. Because I owe it to myself and to the people who stuck by me. Life doesn't wait for us to catch up. We have to keep moving or risk missing what's next. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was next.